Alright, me. It is the next day. It is now the 26th, and I have finished reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Sea of Monsters. I read, it was a half day for the school I was subbing at today. So I probably read about 120, 130 pages. Maybe more, actually, because I think it was a little over halfway. And then finished out when I got home. Took a little nap in between, which is why my hair looks a little bit messy. But yeah. The Sea of Monsters is, continuing on with the Percy Jackson series, is a very fun piece. I think, once again, like, if you don't find these fun, at least, are they the most intelligent books? Certainly not. And that's, not every book needs to be in, the super in-depth, intelligent, what does it all mean type book. But it's still fun and enjoyable. I think what was probably most surprising is that, I mentioned that I had read the Percy Jackson series when I was kind of in elementary school and a little bit into middle school. The second series of books, I've definitely read at least the first one and probably the first two. I don't know if I've finished the series ever, but I definitely finished the first Percy Jackson series. And I've completely forgotten everything about it, right? There's characters and plot points here that I just don't remember at all, despite them being massive and huge, right? The Lightning Thief I remembered pretty well, in terms of some of the major plot points, but that part of that is because of the movie version that exists of it, versus the Sea of Monsters, which I don't remember any of it. I didn't remember any of it, which is, I think, part of it. A book like this, right, in a series like this, I think is kind of quintessentially the reason why I started this project, of where, like, there are books and pieces of media and movies and things that we've seen or read, we've interacted with, but then when it comes to actually remembering what happened with it, for most of us, the only way to go to regain the understanding is then to go back and interact with it again, right? Versus this, which is more of a, because I get to then speak my thoughts, it's giving me a second mode of interacting with it, but then also I can then rewatch this to then get kind of an understanding of some of my thoughts about the book and whatnot, which is, really kind of what this whole thing is about, right? And this whole series, despite the fact that I've read this before, really is that sort of a reason why, because we get introduced to a character here in Tyson that is really important, right? Because it kind of opens and explores this kind of new avenue, right, of where Tyson being a Cyclops, right, kind of opens up this new avenue of, like, characters, but also interactions within the world, of where, like, the eventual plot point at the end of the series, if I remember correctly, is that Percy Jackson gets offered immortality and to become a permanent lesser god or demigod, and he then chooses to ignore, to not accept that, and instead that all the gods must claim their children and things, right? Which now, also having read what kind of like Luke's plan is in this book, right, I think that's where this ends up going. But right, it also opens up this whole other avenue of the half monsters, right, that are children of the gods, but children of the gods and something that is not human, right, whether that be mortals, nymphs, whatever. So that's a really interesting kind of like, you know, door opening to that. I think the character Tyson also kind of represents a very important thing within really kind of the community that Percy Jackson kind of represents, right? In the first book, right, it's kind of established of like this the dyslexia and the ADHD that Percy Jackson has been diagnosed with is a result of kind of this ancient Greek wiring that exists within him that helps him and supports him. And you know, it's these are actually tools to help him, not just and not things to be punished or pushed away, right? And you know, you get this sense of feeling that there is a lot of characters and people within the Camp Half-Blood of all these demigods that feel the same way, right? Of where they were pushed or to some extent bullied or made fun of within this kind of outside world. But then they were able to then find themselves a home or a community within Camp Half-Blood with people that understand them and have gone through similar struggles. And then you introduce a character like Tyson, who represents a lot of these same issues and a lot of these same things, but is still excluded because of who he is from this new place that used to be and seemed so accepting just, you know, a year ago, right? And I think it really speaks to a much larger issue that exists, you know, whether it be within schools, whether it be in communities and societies, you know, whatever it may be, that there is a real issue in which once people feel that they have a community, then they also feel that they have the right to exclude people from the community or to make fun of people that don't quite fit into the community, right? It's one of the things of where like, you know, some of the most outwardly homophobic and some of the most outwardly sexist and some of those outwardly racist things that I've heard and seen in person usually come from people who are subsections of those communities. And it's because of this, oh, they're just not like us kind of feeling, which Tyson really hits on, right? Tyson becomes so important in, you know, the safety and the well-being of all these people. He gets opportunities that no one else gets to do, but he's still not necessarily included because of who he is inherently, right? Which I think is, you know, whether or not Rick Riordan intended to bring that up is a fascinating look into that community and look into kind of that world. Yeah. It's nice to see that Percy Jackson actually gets, you know, some developed kind of personality here. The first book, I didn't really mention it with the first book, but Percy Jackson in the first book definitely feels very like a YN character, Y/N character, of where it's just like, yeah, all right, you're kind of base in your beliefs, you're still learning all this stuff, you don't really have a developed idea yet. Versus this book, which is, I think, really develops some of the small moments that existed with Percy in the first book, and then really develops it into kind of building out who Percy is as a person, which is really, really nice. I think the book still has some of its interesting flaws of, you know, whether it be because it is mostly from kind of Percy's perspective, or whether it is just because it is a, you know, children's book that needs constant action. It is just nonstop, right? Which is certainly makes it fun, but it also means that there's a lot of points that don't get fully discussed or brought up, right? And there's two main ones that I can think of, right? Of where, and they both kind of happen at the end of the story, which is part of the reason why they stick out to me. But the first one is the giving of the golden fleece to Clarice, for her to take by herself back to camp, right? Right. This is a whole exchange that happens, and then it's like the next two, like a paragraph happens after they send Clarice away, like, oh hey, that was really, it was stupid but also brave of you to do that and to trust her with this. And then they are immediately held at knife point by Luke, right? And it's like, it just goes, straight into it. There is no breaks, there is no stopping. And then the other one that was really just like hold on, this should matter way more, is the ending of the penultimate chapter. Percy and Annabeth and Tyson win the chariot race. I think it's the penultimate. It might be the second to penultimate. But one of the very last chapters, they win the chariot race, Annabeth and Percy, and they're celebrating. They're doing all this stuff. Annabeth makes kind of this big announcement, like, it wasn't just myself and Percy, we should be the ones applauding. Percy accepts Tyson as his actual brother, and Annabeth, who they're both 13 at this point, like 13, Annabeth might be 14, right, kind of in that age range, but Annabeth then also kisses Percy on the cheek, right? And I think both of those things should matter way more than they do, right? And it's not like it feels weird to discuss, right? Because it's not some sort of like weird fantasy that exists within. But it is a thing of like, this is a 13-year-old boy who has just received a consideration from someone who's very clearly romantically interested in, and then it gets exactly one line and then leaves it at that, right? Which feels strange to me, that his Percy's feelings aren't explored more within that. And then with Percy finally accepting Tyson as his brother, right? It's this whole thing, right? It's really the main through line of this whole book, right? Of where like Percy is struggling and struggling with his identity, especially in relation to his father and to Tyson, right? Of where like it took so long for Percy to have an understanding of who he was and what this meant for him, and he still doesn't fully understand. But then also suddenly this person that makes his life seem like a joke because he's made fun of by everyone gets immediately accepted by his father, and gets the opportunity to do a lot more in different things than he does. And then this Percy finally being able to look back and go like, hey, look, for both his father and his brother, of like, yeah, there's nothing in them in this exact moment that like is like, oh, you did exactly this and therefore you clear consequences or that led to our success, but rather it is this circumstantial stuff of, well, he did XYZ, which then allowed us to do XYZ, which then caused us to do XYZ, right? And there's a lot of that stuff for both Percy in relation to both Tyson and to his father, Poseidon. And he finally kind of like accepts that, and like it's this kind of like, it should be this really big character moment, and then it just doesn't, like, it gets 2 lines and that's it. Which is kind of just like an right? Because I think that really should be a really big character building for Percy. Once again, I think Annabeth is probably the best character in the series, at least up to this point, right? You have this kind of, you're dealing with the loss and grief in so many different ways, right? This place that was your home is now constantly under attack and being destroyed. Everything that you've worked for and have wanted for so long, it seems to be falling apart. The person that you adore, but then also, you know, is the closest thing you have to any sort of family, has betrayed you and is now actively against you and trying to kill you. The other person that was this huge support is still a tree. But also now you have to retake this new huge task with something that is so similar to what caused your own destruction in the first place, right? An Annabeth storyline of with Annabeth, Luke, and Talia, of where, as it turns out, that this Cyclops that they had met when they were first trying to get to camp didn't kill them necessarily, but slowed them down significantly enough and caused enough harm to them that it allowed other monsters to catch up to then kill them, right? And to you know, cause all this pain and all this destruction that has occurred, right? And like that's, to me, such an interesting character. You know, you have these couple different points throughout the book in which Annabeth has the opportunity to take power for herself, which is kind of what she's always wanted, whether that be through Cersei, whether that be through Luke, and has the power to take things for herself. And as hard as it is, she hasn't taken it yet, which I think is just such a is a way more interesting character than I think what a lot of times gets sent out about who this character is, especially in regards to the movie. Yeah, I think that's it for the Sea of Monsters.